linkedin.com/ignitetrain999. That will ensure that you can participate in the questions that we put up during our presentation. And so do log into that now. It'll say that you're just waiting for the presentation, and then I'll be able to share it from there. So as Ben said, we have two Bens on the call if you've been on these before. I'll be kind of going through some of the key content of one of our sessions that we have, which is powerful presentations. Cheers. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now just to give us a bit more sort of like gallery view. So if you want to change your view now, you can either see speaker view, which is just me, or you can change the gallery view and you can see more of the people. And what I wanted to start this session with is just by addressing the fact that I'm now doing presentation skills virtually. So it changes the way in which we do things. But no, I've been on countless webinars myself, never mind delivering them, and I'm very much guilty for being that person that just sits down and presents. Now, I know our sessions are a little bit different because we're looking to kind of train as well and give advice, but there is an ability where look, you can stand up, you can present so that you can use your body language a bit more assertively. I feel better standing and being able to present and speak to you guys, use my hand gestures that I would normally do, whereas when I'm sat down, we naturally kind of slunk into the chair. So I'm going to talk a little bit about body language today. And the other kind of key aspects that I'm going to mention is a brief overview of how to structure your presentations. And the final thing that I'm going to cover is how we can quickly turn boring slides into something a bit more appealing. So it will involve me actually showing you on PowerPoint how you can turn something from text into something a bit more visual. So those are the three key aspects that we're going to cover today. Now, just for me to return back to my presentation, what I want to do first is ask you a question. So on your poll everywheres now, you should see a question asking you about presentations. Now, if that isn't live, I shall make it so. So I'm just waiting for it to pop up on my screen. And then, so it's a little bit slower than usual and it isn't active, but it should be now. So I'm asking you now, what do you think makes a good presentation? Okay, so great, it's interactive. So even though you're typing it onto a system now, then, you know, we can be interactive. So yeah, not sweating, sorry, again, might be me. You know. Always the way, if it's in a room that you're not used to, the AC's not been in on this room, so it's a little bit warmer than usual, but yes, we should prepare our rooms. High definition pictures is definitely something that you should use within your presentation, so excellent for covering that. Yes, it needs to be clear. We need to make sure that we use good graphics. Yes, it needs to be engaging. What else are we seeing on here? Everything's moving around so quickly. Keep it simple to the point. That's what I'm hoping to aim to do today. Again, with it being a taster, we're going to be a little bit more direct. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but at least give you some tips. Connecting with the audience, yes, that's why we like to see your cameras, because I've got a bank of 5 people at the top of my list, and it's nice to be able to see faces so that I can actually look at some people while I'm communicating. So even though it's visual, even though it's virtual, I still appreciate the fact that I can look at some people and make some form of eye contact. So we will discuss that a little bit more. Yes, it needs to be structured. Yes, you shouldn't read off the screen. So again, we're going to look at how we can make that a little bit different later. But obviously I'm reading off the screen now because it's your comments. There's a really good one there where someone said it needs to be served with passion. And that's one of the key elements. You've got to have some form of belief in what you're saying. You've got to make it your own. And what tends to happen is presentations are usually things that are given to us, say, I need you to present this. So we don't always feel the connection. So what we might need to do is work out how can I create some value for this to me. So make it more about this is your opportunity to show to the people that you're presenting to what type of person you are. So it's not so much about the content, but it's more about how you interact with them. So that is extremely important. Okay, so we've got a good few key points there, and I'm glad that everyone's kind of covered that. And let's kind of see what we've got moving on. So again, here's a nice fact that I saw in my little bit of research, trying to look at what should you do in terms of preparation for your presentation. So with this saying, actually, a speech that you rehearse actually takes you a third of the time longer when you're actually giving it to an audience. So there are some statistics that actually show that that can increase even more if the audience is even larger. So the unusual thing we have here with virtual kind of presenting is the audience doesn't seem as big. So even though we might have, don't know, is it over 90 on this now, Ben?
100.
All right, so we've hit the top, so that's great. But that doesn't feel any different to if I was just presenting to a couple of people virtually, because I don't get to see all the faces. However, when we are physically in front of people and seeing all those faces, it naturally gives us a little bit more of a kind of stress response, which is good stress. You know, it gets us through those moments. But because we can see everyone, we tend to take a little bit longer. So the purpose of why I showed you this, to say it actually takes a third of the time longer to deliver, is one of the key aspects of having a better presentation is rehearsing. And it's one of the key things that people do not do. They spend lots of time putting content into their presentation, trying to make sure that the slides are okay, but they don't always give thought to what they are going to say. So in order for us to start this off, what I'm going to talk to you now about is what we should do in order to keep a good structure. So the first point that I want you to be aware of is tell them what you're going to tell them. It's a really good aspect to start your presentation. Now, if you were listening to my start, that is exactly what I did. I told you that we're going to go through 3 key components of the taster session. Ben gave you a little bit of an overview to say, yes, this isn't everything, but it's a condensed version. But I said, I'm going to tell you how to structure. I'm going to tell you a little bit about style and body language, and I'm going to show you how you can improve your slides. So by giving you those 3 aspects, you now know what's coming with the rest of this session. Now, the second point is then to tell them. So you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them. So now I'm going through my first point. I'm then going to go through my second and third point. And then to finalize, what I'm actually going to do is tell you what I told you. Now, you'll see that I've put this into a graphic of 1, 2, 3. And I always want you to think about the rule of 3 when you're creating your presentations, because it's a key aspect. So I gave you 3 points at the start of this session. 3 things that you can take away. Now, you might not always remember all of them, but I guarantee you'll remember the first one or the last one. And what you want to ensure for your presentation is people take away one aspect of your presentation. You need to make sure that you've got something aligned that is key for your audience to take away. So give them 3 because it's an easy number for people to remember. Be aware that they're probably only going to walk away with 1, possibly 2, and segment your structure into 3 sections. Tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you've just told them. If you can have 3 aspects within each of those, then that's great. So what I recommend is when you're telling them what you're going to tell them, introduce yourself. So I didn't quite do that. Ben did me a little bit of justice there. Tell them how long it's going to be. Well, you're here. It's going to be just under an hour. I'm not expecting this to go over on this one. And then what actually is the content? So Kevin kindly sent you out the links to let you know what's going on with the content. So you're kind of knowing what's coming. But then I've backed that up. I've told you exactly what I'm going to tell you. The next section now is those 3 separate points: structure, style, visual aids. Each of those will be broken down as well. So always try and stick to the rule of 3. If it makes it easy for you when you're structuring your presentation, use post-it notes. Try and ensure that you've got 9 post-it notes all segmented out. What's going to be your start, your middle, your end. It's really simple. It gives you some structure, and what it allows you to do is easily visualize as the presenter what your order is. So that even if you don't know the exact things that you're going to say, visualize those post-it notes so that it allows you to at least know what's coming next. So use the tell method, as it's an extremely easy way to start with your structure. Now, one of the other things that gets involved in structure is telling stories. And it's something that is really useful now with presentations. So what is it that you enjoy about stories? So if you go to your poll everywhere again, I just want you to tell me, what is it that makes us enjoy stories? I'll just wait for a few of those to come up on the screen. Yeah, you can relate. So maybe you've been through something similar, so you can kind of have that connection. Okay, the storyteller is what makes us like stories. So again, if that person is a little bit boring or monotone, then that can have a real impact about whether we listen to the story or not. Visualization is a really good one. So we need to ensure that we kind of create those pictures in people's minds. We remember things that we've seen visually a lot more than what we do just through audio. So it's extremely important that we create some visual element. If we have audio and visual together, we create a much better recall of people's information. It's a good way to break the ice. That's an excellent one. The message is better understood. We feel a passion and a personal touch behind it. There's an experience. It could be an analogy for what we're going to discuss going forward. Great. Yeah, breaks the ice again. Easy to remember. Yet we remember stories better than just data. So what I'm going to do now is tell you a little bit about how you can turn things into a story. And what's important is, even if you're someone who is just showing data as part of your presentation, that doesn't mean that you can't make a story out of it. So firstly, you need to discuss, how did this data come about? What is the purpose of it? And you need to make someone the focus of that story. So is it you? Are you the person responsible for making this data happen? If it's a team, pick one person within that team and make it about them and their journey.
And so the slide hasn't changed, apologies. If you're still on the high level.
I'm not showing it yet. So that's what I want you to think about. How can you make someone, rather than the data, part of your story? So once you've got that, then I want you to follow these key steps I've got going forwards. So to move on to our next one, here you go, Ben. The first step that I'm going to say is, you need to have it like a comic. Okay, so if you think about a comic book, there's always a hero and an anti-hero. There's always an enemy, a villain, and it doesn't mean that you need to make a person a villain. It could be a problem that's the villain. So try and visualize what your hero, or who your hero is. It needs to be a person to make the story come to life. So even if you're dealing in facts and information, you can still create someone to go through it. And even if it's someone who's made up, it doesn't matter. It's about you telling something that makes that learning stick. So your enemy could even be the competition that you've had to kind of fight off. The second step that I want you to think about is, what is the actual problem? So again, in a comic, there's always some issue that's happened. What is the villain doing that is now making the hero have to act? So when you're thinking about your problem, so when you have your data, for example, what was the problem that you were trying to counteract? So again, that person that you have, let's call him Ahmed. Ahmed wants to solve the problem of raising his sales in the department. That in itself just creates a small element of the story. You know, against him was, yes, he had the competition, the customers weren't willing to buy. All those elements can be part of your problem. So think about the problems. What is that conflict that exists within the problem? What's in their way, and how do you want it to look? So what do you want them to be at the end of this? Do you want them to be completely successful? Is it just to overcome it a small amount? Is it to get this huge, overwhelming end game? Whatever that might be, you need to structure those key elements. The third step is to tap into people's emotions. So tell them what would happen if this person fails. What's it going to mean to them? You know, maybe that person starts to visualize it themselves. So, you know, Ahmed really started to think about what this would mean to him and his family if he didn't manage to increase his sales. He was worried that he might have to move back home or try and find a job that was less paid or he didn't enjoy as much. So by bringing failure into it, it gets our people to connect. So again, what someone said on the previous question, we kind of make that connection. We can relate to that. Then say how this is going to affect them. So what good is going to come out of this if we do get to the end goal? And what will that success mean to that person? So those 3 steps start us off nicely. Then we want you to tap into a level of uncertainty. So of the problems that you've discussed, is there a problem within the problem? So is there a fact that there's another obstacle that exists that creates some element of twist? So what actually happened is, you know, Ahmed's working for his brother-in-law. So now it makes it even more difficult for him to try and raise those sales because he's not just doing it as an employee, but he's also got a kind of personal relationship there as well. So try and hold one potential problem back that might create some form of twist within that. It might be that Ahmed needs to, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, this is why you need to prep. He might need to drop some of his usual clients and work on one huge client. So he might need to disappoint a number of his current clients to get a bigger one. So add some element of kind of uncertainty, something that can add a little bit of shock value to your story. Then the last thing that I want you to finish is to end with a bang. Okay, so is there a call to action? Is it some form of question that you can pose to the audience? It doesn't require an answer. It's just something that they can think about going forward. Or is there a quote that you can get them to linger on that brings that story to life? So maybe it's a call to action is just say, so are you just like Ahmed in this story? Will you need to jump over some barriers in order for you to be the better person? All those elements kind of bring that storytelling to a close. And then, depending on what you've told that story with regards to, then you can follow it in with some business. But if I use the example I mentioned before about showing data on your presentation, your whole journey there could simply about how we started to gather our data, the changes that we made, the impacts that it had, the kind of troubles that we faced on that journey when it dipped too low, when we had to change the way we did things, and then where we currently are. So what is the big change that's done here? Can it be done in other departments to bring the business's sales completely up? So using storytelling is actually easier than we expect. We don't need to have some real story about how it's impacted us. We can make a story up. So that's why I said make it a comic. Most people enjoy reading a little cartoon or a comic, so use these 5 steps for you to try and make a story out of your content. All right, so that's kind of covered a bit of our structure elements. Now I'm going to move on to an element of style, and this is where I'm going to focus on our 2 potential methods. So yes, you might be someone who sits down and presents in our current environment. You might be standing up like I am now, or you might be able to physically present to people. So if you're getting back to work now and we're socially distancing, then we're okay doing that face-to-face. But what are the key things that we can do in both of these elements, sitting down and standing up virtually, but also physically in front of people? Well, again, I'm trying to make it easy for you. I've got 3 style tips that I'm going to go through. Okay, so firstly, I want you to think about your voice. So again, mine's not particularly great in this environment, but there's 5 elements within voice that you can always work on. So the first one is your pace. So how fast are you speaking? How slow are you speaking? And how do you vary that? So again, think back to our storytelling technique. you know, some of the key concepts that you want to convey to your audience, you might want to slow down ever so slightly when you're talking about it. When you slow down, it makes people pay attention. So they actually start to listen to the words that you're saying and not filling in the blanks. But then if you just want to kind of make sure that people have got the gist of what you're saying, but you're going to let them know that you're moving on to the next section, you can speed up your pace a little bit. So by varying your pace, you actually keep the audience engaged because they're not thinking that you're just speaking at the same constant tone. Pitch is another great one. It's about how high your voice goes or how low your voice goes. And again, this can help you in order to bring the audience towards whether it's something to be energized about. So you might kind of lift your voice a little bit more because you want people to get really excited about what you're saying. Or again, you might go really low because you want people to focus. So you can mix your pace and pitch. When you change your pitch, it ensures that you're not being that monotone voice that people kind of don't want to listen to. So again, with people saying before, storytellers that are engaging, this helps us. We need to use power in our voice. And when we talk about power, it's a little bit more like our volume. So obviously where I am today, I've got to be a little bit wary about how high I go, because if I use quite a big power in my voice, I'm going to get a lot more echo back. It's going to make things disruptive to you. But if I talk too low, too quiet, you might not be able to hear me fully. So again, it's about balancing that. And if you're in a small meeting room, again, you might not need to have as much power in your voice to get people to hear you. If you're in a larger auditorium, you might need to lift your voice. And it's not about shouting, it's just about being louder, okay? So always bear in mind, power is not shouting. Then we need to consider using things as a pause. And that's an example of using it. When we explain elements of our story, we often think that we need to just carry on and carry on. Using a pause is extremely important for getting your audience to think about the content that you've just said. So don't be afraid of using pauses in your presentation. Just make sure that they're scheduled at the right time, usually following the question, because sometimes we ask a question and then we try to answer it as well, or we follow the question with another question. So don't be afraid of silence. Use pauses effectively. It helps emphasize points that you've discussed. And then lastly, pronunciation is key, especially when you're delivering to multiple nationalities, multiple cultures. It's really important for you to ensure your words are said correctly. Now, depending on who you're communicating with, you might be able to change this. So, you know, if I go back home to my home country and go to the town where I'm from, my pronunciation changes dramatically. It becomes a lot worse. I don't pronounce certain letters. I nearly did it then, I wrote letters. So you need to make sure that you address your audience in the right way. Are they able to hear everything that you're saying? Are you being clear about it? And again, pronunciation helps alongside your pace. If you are too fast, it limits your pronunciation. So again, try and ensure that you are speaking at a fair pace that everyone can understand. So your voice is a key style tip in order to be more presentable to your audience. The next step that I'm going to talk about is body language, and this is primarily why I decided to stand up. So you might think I don't have the ability to stand up and present. It's not something that I've got the capability to do. Well, let me tell you now that I currently have a coffee table, an old coffee table, my ironing board, and some books and a stand just to kind of raise it to this level. So make do with what you can to try and ensure that the way you are kind of visibly seen allows you to get points across. You know, most of you might now be paying more attention to my slide deck, but the fact that I haven't gone on from this, I haven't showed you the key points about body language, generally most people will be looking at the screen now and looking at what I'm doing and what I'm saying. And that is a key point about your presentation. You need to decide when you want people to pay attention to you and when you want them to pay attention to your slides. And that's why I've been releasing information at smaller segments so that you see what's on the screen, but then once you've seen it, there's nothing else to see. So then you decide to potentially look at me. I mean, some of you might be looking at different screens elsewhere, but I can't help that. But again, why I decided to stand up is what I was saying to you earlier. It gives us more less restriction. I'm using my hands now a lot more than what I would do if I was sat down, and this is more my natural kind of pose. So yes, I want to ensure that you can see my hands, that I'm saying 1, 2, 3 and getting those points across. So that if I'm trying to say that you've got to be louder, you can see that I'm conveying that through my body language as well. So key tips on this is be tall. And that's again why I stood up. It's easier for me to create a bit more of a presence now stood up than it is if I was just sat down. And even if I sit up in my chair, we naturally get this slump where we just feel a little bit low. And when we sit down in a chair and we start to kind of sink into it, it limits the power in our voice, our chest closes up, so we find it a little bit more difficult to breathe, so we tend to take more breaths, and sometimes you can hear people go, because they're kind of taking in more. So if you are sat down, to be tall in your chair, and you can do this now, if we had cameras on, we'd probably see people move around, but move the base of your back, so your coccyx, just where your bum starts, right into the back of your chair. So again, as you do that, it forces you to keep your legs straight on the chair and immediately kind of picks up the bottom of your back. Then I want you to lift your shoulders up and just rock them back ever so slightly and drop them down again. And that gives you much more of a taller posture. So whether you are physically presenting in front of people, I want you to do that straight away. So lift yourself up, shoulders up, roll them back a little bit so your chest comes out, and then drop them. And that gives you a stronger pose. It gives a little bit more confidence in your delivery. I love hearing people use the word confidence because it's not a behavior that we can display. It's a perception that we have. And in order for us to give confidence, we need to be showing all these things. We need to have good body language, which shows that we have a kind of puffed out chest, that we're confident in what we're saying, that we stick firmly to a spot or pick 3 spots on a stage or an area where we move between, but generally we stay where we are. Easy to do if you're sat down, but again, just be aware of lifting kind of your back so it's as straight as possible. Then I want you to think about eye contact as the next element of body language. Again, a little bit more difficult if we are being virtual because we've got that need to kind of see what's on the screen. So when we're having meetings on whatever platform it might be on, I'm going to use Zoom because we're on it now, it's very simple for us to kind of look at the screen. So I don't know whether you can see the difference with me being a bit further away, but if I look towards the bottom of my screen, as if I was looking at different people there, that is okay if I'm communicating with them in a meeting format, because I'm expected to observe what they're saying, what they're doing, in order for me to reply. When we're doing a presentation, it's vitally important for us to look right in the webcam. And the reason for that is because that creates that element of trust, okay? I'm telling you my information. If I was kind of looking over here and just talking about it, because maybe I had some information over here that I could read, maybe if I'm just reading off the screen, you don't get that connection. But the moment I look into the webcam, it's like I'm looking directly at you. And that is exactly what you should do. If you have prepped your presentation enough, if we have rehearsed, you don't really need to see what's on your screen. So you should be able to do it as if you were just looking at yourself maybe. Because you should know your content enough to speak directly into the webcam so that people have that kind of belief in what you're saying. It builds rapport, which I'll go into on the next bit, when you use that eye contact, but also ensure you're using your hand gestures that mean something to the content. If you're going through different steps, then yes, of course, use those kind of motions. When I told you about 3 things, I held up 3 fingers to ensure that you notice that it's 3 elements. So again, if we are sat down, if our camera's not positioned at the right spot, we might be doing these things where we go 3, but if I do it here, you can't see that. So I have to make sure that I lift up my hand so it's visible to you. When we're sat down, sometimes our screens don't show enough of our kind of lower body, and we use lower hand gestures when we are sat down. So again, be aware of what's in your screen vicinity. So I know that up to here and up to here is how far I can kind of use my hand gestures. If I start to do things like this, you can't see what I'm doing with my hands, and low as well. So be aware of what your screen is. Oh, that was quite a good little mix. That was too far in there. So be aware of what is in your frame. Last thing is to smile. Smiling makes people warm to you. It's what makes a good presenter, simply by connecting with the audience, not just through eye contact, but also with that smile. It's what builds rapport with people, and we make a connection with someone who's smiling. If you are too focused and you've got kind of a flat mouth and you're just speaking, for one, a flat mouth immediately limits the way in which we speak. A flat mouth makes us speak a little bit more monotone. If we have a bit of a sad face, it really makes it difficult for us to speak. But if we have a smile on our face, it immediately lifts our voice. It allows us to amplify in the right way. So keep a smile on your face while you're presenting, because if anything, that is what people will walk away with, feeling that they have made a connection with that presenter. So there's some key elements that all fall into voice, body language, and smile within our style tips. If I move on to the next question, what is your biggest frustration when viewing slides in a presentation? So when someone has slides accompanying their presentation, what is your biggest frustration, or what do you hate to see? Just double, yeah, that is live, just to double check. If they're ugly, we are talking about the slides, aren't we, not the person, okay? Too much content, too much text, too crowded, a million fonts, yeah, if we forget the information. If it's too crowded, sorry, I've said that one. We've got stupid animation, okay, great. Okay, if we forget the info that's maybe on the slides, we've got cluttered ones again, too many words. Okay, so a lot of these elements seems to be a lot of words. Poor resolution images, I know I saw that earlier when someone said use high-res images. Bad grammar, definitely something. Okay, so there's quite a lot of points here that are about cluttered, too much information, too noisy, too lengthy. Okay, so the next point that I'm going to raise, and it's my final point with in these presentations, is what you can do to turn boring slides into better looking slides. So colours like the ice cream in a fridge, great. So if I just move back to this, sometimes we might see slides that are a little bit like this, okay? So they have bullet points, some of those bullet points are indented, there's quite a lot of information there. Font sizes might be slightly different, and it's a bit jarring for us to see. If you are given information like this, because again, if someone says, yeah, here's some information, I want you to make a presentation out of that, this is mostly what it comes to you as. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to come closer to the screen now so that I can actually use my laptop. So let me just adjust slightly. I'm now going to show you what you can do as a relative quick fix on this. So just kind of give the game away there with that. Well, let me get back onto this one. So when you have PowerPoint open and you can see all your content, one of the easiest ways to make it a little bit nicer is to just select your content by selecting the whole word box there. go to convert to Smart Art, and people might now just be going, no, what's he doing using Smart Art? I don't recommend using Smart Art as your go-to. What Smart Art is something that gives you ideas to work with moving forwards. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. So if you have Microsoft on a Windows, the layout is a little bit different because I'm working on PowerPoint for Mac, so some of the applications are a tiny bit different. So when I hover over these options in Smart Art, usually on a Windows one, they automatically change so you can see what they look like. But I can't do that on here. So I'm just going to select one off the cuff here. And then once this happens, I get a little bit of a change in the way the information is presented. So again, I can look at some of these layouts and decide, okay, what do I want it to actually look like? So when you click on this, just move that out of the way, you actually get the different template styles. So you get lists, you get processes, cycles, hierarchy. So I'm going to go for a bit of a hierarchy because I've got data that shows things in a little different way. And I want it to look like this, so it's in a bit of a box. So now that we've got this looking like this, we still think, oh, this looks ugly, it looks horrible. But what you can do is easily change some of this content. So when you're working on Smart Art, it's all dictated by bullet points. So in some of the content that I had earlier, I had a mix of bullet points, some information not in bullet points. So firstly, if I start with the UAE key dates, that's going to be my header. So I want that to be one particular bullet point. So everything else, I'm going to indent simply by pressing tab. And once I've done that, you saw that that moved down. So every piece of information now, sorry, I need to tab to make it fall under everything else. So I know this seems a little bit messy, me doing it, but once you do it once, it's nice and easy for you to do. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom one, which was the one where we had everything under one bullet point. And again, all you need to do, tab this, go to your actual content bit, delete it out a bit, space it down to a bullet point, put it in. Now, what you can see now is all my data is now put in a different format. So I've actually got my title, I've got my key dates, and then I've got the information about what happened in those dates. Again, it's still not looking great, still not looking perfect, but it gives us a basis for our layout. Now, what people don't tend to know is when you've got Smart Art, if you try to move anything, like if I want to move one box, it doesn't really move that much, or it makes all the other content difficult to see. So all the font in all my other boxes has now disappeared. So I'm going to forget that and undo that. And if you click all of your Smart Art box and go to Format and simply go to Ungroup, what this now does is it now gives you the option where you can edit different boxes. So this is why I said to you, use Smart Art as your base. Because what happens is you can create some form of content like this and then change it all around. So maybe I want all my dates to look like this, so they're below. Maybe I want them the other way around, so it says January. I can make this a little bit smaller. I can move these all up so they're a little bit closer. I can actually make these a little bit bigger. So just by using Smart Art as your base, you can turn bullet point content into nice visuals. And what this also allows you to do is create templates for future use so that you can actually just throw in new content into the existing slides that you've done. So if I now just go back to my open deck, and go on to this next page, this is what we started with. We started with content that was just very text heavy. Nobody likes to see it. Even if we were to animate that so that it was nice and simple, and again, I know someone said silly animation, always stick to appear or fade. Okay, they're probably the two best animations that you can use, and it just allows you to control how your presentation flows. So we started with that data. We then moved it to something. So here's one I created earlier, Lupita, if you're from the UK. And I just made the titles of the dates a different color, just to make it stand out a little bit. So if I'm in a bit of a rush, at least that looks a little bit nicer than all my text together. But then I did something a little bit different where I actually made them into 4 quadrants. So again, and then I started to use the colors of the UAE. So it kind of makes it feel a little bit more related to the content. And then I could earphones out. That's a good way to present well, isn't it? And then the last one, yeah, you can just make it where all the dates are on the side and then the content is across the side. And again, the reason I did it that way, so that it was more horizontal focused, is because of how much information was in that content. So by stretching it out, it looks like less. Whereas when it's pulled together, because it's all in a block, it looks like more. So that is a nice little tip about how you can turn your content that is bullet point focused into a more visually appealing slide, just using the same content. So that kind of brings me to the end. What we'd like to do when we kind of focus on this is to tell you about our free upcoming webinars, but also give this option where people can ask questions. So Ben, do we have any questions in the chat function?
No, we do not.
No, would anyone care to open their mic and ask a question at the moment?
Awkward silence.
Yeah. Right, you know.
Yes.
This is yeah.
Hi, Farid speaking. I would like to know, do you advise to have a presentation without questions, or allowing questions is a better way to get people involved?
It's up to you. So it depends on what you're conveying. So if you have a time limit on your presentation, like I kind of do today, one of the best things to do is do what I did at the start of this session and just say that any questions are welcome, but they'll be addressed towards the end. So if you're physically in a room with people, then I just say, please leave your questions to the end. Because what tends to happen is people ask questions that might be covered later on in your content. So it just interrupts your flow. Or if they ask a question and you get into a level of detail with it, it eats into your own time of going through your presentation. And then what you find is you're rushing through the last few slides. So my recommendation is always to offer questions, but tend to keep them towards the end.
Okay, clear. Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
And a key point, Farid, where you've mentioned that is I've not necessarily finished how I do my presentation right now. So what I have done is now I've approached the end of my content where I've told you the content. This is the bit where I tell you what I told you. So we always ask questions before we look to finish in full. Because what I'll do now is if I kind of bring it to a close before, in fact, has anyone else got any questions before we finish?
Hi, Ben. Just a quick one. What advice would you give to anyone who is really nervous about presenting in person, even on Zoom or in person? I know you said about practicing, but how can they practice and rehearse, etc.?
How can they practice and rehearse? Is that kind of more that key element?
Well, a bit of both, really. So if they need to, you said like rehearse at the beginning. So how do they do that? And then what advice do you have just about speaking in public in general, really?
Okay, well, one of the key ways in which to practice and rehearse is to record yourself. So even if it's for you to grab your phone and just prop it up against something, record yourself going through your presentation. What that does is it gives you 2 major opportunities. The first opportunity is that you can watch it back and you can see what you did well, what you didn't, what your body language was like, what parts you got stuck on, so you'll need to kind of refresh your mind about that content. And the second thing that's really important is it gives you a time frame of what you're currently working towards. So what you can do then, once you've practiced that once, is then feel a little bit more comfortable that you can remove content if you're short of time. You can address your kind of body language, your style, in order to be more present, to say. And the more you practice it, the more comfortable you are. If you are someone who does get stressed, there's loads of different tips that you can utilize. Go back to one of my stress webinars if you want, and some of those key aspects help you there. But practice is always the key thing, Katie. Always make sure you practice it because it makes you feel more comfortable. Generally, think about what's the worst that can happen. So if I did this presentation now and it was an absolute disaster, all right, some of you guys might think, oh, that went badly, didn't it? But then you might go, well, do you know what? They've done loads of others. Maybe it was just a bad day. You might not want to attend any other future sessions, but do you know, as much as that's something that we regret, we'd want you to attend for once. Really, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really do much to me. It might dent my confidence a little bit, but what it also does is it gives me that opportunity to improve. So I can look back and go, yes, it was a disaster, but what did I do wrong? How can I correct it the next time? So when you compare it to what's actually bad in the grand scheme of it, you know, presenting in public is not one of the biggest issues. So give it a bit of perspective and don't beat yourself up about it. So yeah, in closing then, thank you very much for your attendance today. What we've covered over the course of this 1 hour session is a brief overview of our powerful presentations where you can create a different structure and include storytelling into your presentations. The fact that you need to address your body language where you can be stood up, sat down, in front of people, what some of those 3 key tips are within there. So your voice, your body language, and your, see, even I forgot the last one, so how can you remember it? And then how you can adjust your slides so that content is not overwhelmingly a bullet point, but you can put it into something more specific. So 3 key points that we've covered, and thank you very much for your time today. Going back to that while we close, that's the reason why you put questioning just before your close. Because if I was to finish on questions now, you guys would have asked your questions, all I would have to say now is, okay, that's it, bye. And it kind of ends on a slump. So always ask questions before you're looking to close down and recap what you've told them, because then that gives you the opportunity to kind of end on a high. So all I leave you with now is go forth and change the way in which you present. Make sure that you've got a story to tell. Improve your slide decks so that it's not text heavy. And yeah, just change your style so that you present in a different way. It might be quite refreshing to your people at work if you're stood up and giving a bit of a presentation. So give it a go. Thank you very much for all your support over the last few months while we've been doing these webinars. We are taking a break next week over Eid, but like Ben said, we've got our mental health Q&A tomorrow, and then we've got our sessions starting up again on the 2nd, 3rd?
Yeah, 2nd.
Do keep an eye out for those on our social media, and if you do want to go back on any of our previous webinars, do go onto our YouTube channel.